Before we begin notes 2.2, we have one vocabulary word, which is additive inverse, and that's an integer and its opposite. So our examples we have is 2 plus a negative 2. So if you take a whole number, add its opposite, you get 0. Symbols, using a plus a negative a, you still get 0. If you take any number and add its opposite, you're going to end up with 0. Notes 2.2 is on adding integers. We're going to add 2 integers and add more than 2 integers. The Common Core state standards are listed in the mathematical practices. There's an example on adding on the number line in your math book on page 55 and 56 if you'd like to look back at that also. The first thing that we're going to do is find each sum using a number line. Number 1 says negative 4 plus a negative 2. So whenever we add on a number line, we're always going to start at 0. Negative numbers tells us to go to the left, and positive numbers tells us to go to the right. So we're going to start at 0, and we're going to go to the left and stop at negative 4. Then we're going to add another 2 to that, a negative 2, so we're going to go to the left, and we're going to stop. So when you add a negative 4 plus a negative 2, you end up with a negative 6. Example number 2, negative 5 plus a negative 3. So we start at 0, we go to the left, 5, stop at negative 5, and then we want to add another negative 3 to it, so we stop at negative 8. So negative 5 plus a negative 3 is negative 8. You can notice that when you're adding with the same signs, all you're doing is keeping the sign the same, and you're adding your numbers. Number 3, we have 7 plus a negative 11. 7 tells us to go to the right, whereas the negative 11 tells us to go to the left. So we're going to start by going to the right 7 and then stopping. Now it says to go to the left 11. So here's 7, and then we have to go 1, 2, 3, 4 more and stop at negative 4. So 7 plus a negative 11 is negative 4. You can notice that when we went 7 to the right and then back 7 to the left, these cancel each other out. So we're canceling out 7 positives with 7 negatives. So that gives you 0, and you still have 4 more to the left. Number 4 is a negative 2 plus 9. So the negative tells us to go to the left 2, and then the 9 tells us to go to the right 9. So we go to the right 2, then we need to go 7 more, and we stop at 7. You can see again that the negative 2 with the positive 2 cancels out to make 0, and you're still left with 7. So if you look at 3 and 4, when we had more negatives, we took that sign, negative, and subtracted. So negative 4. And number 4, we have more positives. So take that sign positive, and 9 minus 2 would give you 7. So here are the rules. When you're adding and you have same signs, you just keep the sign the same and add. So using 6 and 15 on each of the examples, if we have a positive 6 plus a positive 15, we keep it positive and add 6 plus 15. So it's a positive 21. In the next one, negative 6 plus a negative 15, we keep the sign negative, they're both the same, and add 6 plus 15 is 21, so it's negative 21. When you have different signs, you take the sign of the larger number. That means, what do you have more of? More positives or more negatives, and then subtract. So in this example, we have negative 6 plus 15. We have more positives. We take that sign, your answer is going to positive, and you're going to subtract 15 minus 6, you're left with 9 positives. So what you're doing is you're matching up 6 negatives with 6 positives, and you end up with 9 positives. Second example, 6 plus a negative 15. Now 15 has more negatives, so you're going to take the sign negative and match up your 15 negatives with your 6 positives, and you're still left with 9 negatives. So using those rules, we're going to find the sum of negative 24 plus negative 56. So since they're both negative, you're going to keep the sign negative and add. And if you can't do it mentally in your head, add off to the side. So it's negative 80. Number 6, 86 plus a negative 50, they're more positives. So our answer is going to be positive, and it's 86 minus 55 to give you positive 31. Number 7, negative 45 plus 15, we have more negatives. So we take the sign of the larger number and subtract the large one minus the smaller one to give you negative 30. Now in the examples we just did, we were adding when we had two numbers. Well, what happens if you're adding more than two integers? Well, we can do it two ways. We can add our positive numbers, add our negatives, and add the two sums together. We can always flip-flop and add our negative numbers first and then our positives, then add the two numbers together. Or use the order of operations, which means you're going to go from left to right. So let's start with adding your positives together and your negatives. So I always like to start with whatever number I have first. I have a negative 3 plus a negative 5. I add those up. I get negative 8. Then I have 6 plus 4, which is 10. Now I take the sign of the larger number, which is 10, so that's positive, and subtract. 10 minus 8 is 2. Now if we do the order of operations in here, to do the order of operations, we would have to go from left to right. So that means I would add my two numbers together, so negative 3 plus 6, which is 3, bring everything down. Now add your two positives together to give you 7 plus a negative 5, and then 7 plus a negative 5 is 2. You can do it either way, but the majority of the students like to do add up, group all together when you're adding more than two integers. So we're going to focus number 9 on that way. So we're going to add all our positives together. So I have 11 plus 5, which is 16, and then 16 plus 9, which is 25. I can bring everything down, and then plus a negative 11, take the sign of the larger and subtract, you get 14. Number 10 is adding when we have the absolute value. So in this example, the absolute value of negative 12 plus 5, we have to go inside the absolute value first and add, but we have different signs. So we take the sign of the larger number and subtract the larger one minus the smaller one to give us negative 7. Now take the absolute value of negative 7, which is 7. For number 11, we have to go inside the absolute value first, subtract to give you 18. Now take the absolute value, which is 18. Number 12, the absolute value of negative 2 plus 15, go inside the absolute value, take the sign of the larger number and subtract. 15 minus 2 is 13. Take the absolute value of 13, which is 13. Some problem solving when you're adding integers. Number 13 says a blue whale was at a depth of 280 feet below the surface of the water. After 10 minutes, it rose 194 feet. What is the current depth of the blue whale? Write an addition equation, then solve. So the blue whale was at a depth of 280 feet below the surface. So that's negative 280. After 10 minutes, we don't need that information. Then tells us it rose 194 feet. So start with negative 280, add 194 to that. What is the current depth of that? Well, we'd have to take the sign of the larger number, which is negative, and subtract to give you negative 86 feet. 14 says the scuba diver is at 120 feet below the water surface. She then ascends 83 feet. What is her current depth? Write an addition equation and solve. So if a scuba diver is 120 feet below the water, that's negative 120. She then ascends. Ascend means goes up 83 feet. So negative 120 plus 83 feet. We take the sign of the larger number, which would be negative, subtract, we get negative 37